I think we are very fortunate today that we have, especially Fadzir, who has been one of our prominent Minister of Tourism for Malaysia. In fact, he introduced many things, songs, and all kind of events, which actually, yes, songs, Malaysia truly Asia. And I can still remember Fadzir when he was the Minister of Tourism. We were very active in terms of the country, in tourism. And I must say, it was during his era that the tourism expansion in the country took place really at a fast pace. Big hand for Fadzir. We also have, of course, a professor from Canada who has spoken yesterday, and he's another expert in this area of tourism, especially on matters related to planning and how to get the best advantage of this economy. And big hand for Professor and Ms. Chiba, who actually is from UNESCO, Jakarta. She has also spoken yesterday about museums and how museums can be another very interesting tourism product which the Asian countries have yet to tap on the way that the Western countries have tapped. And a big hand again for Ms. And last but not least, we have Mr. Kruger. I remember him, especially on that Mekong moments. It's a new way of marketing your tourism product. I thought it was very interesting. Use the social media and use people, the tourists themselves, to promote tourism, which is, I thought, was a very interesting concept. So, we have come to realize after 2 days that tourism is actually economic potential for the world. In fact, you see every country of the world is trying to position itself to tap on this growing economy. And as you also listen to some of the speakers, there are some disruptive forces on the business. Technology is one, and how do we manage this? How do we sustain tourism? This is a very important challenge, a very important question that we need to address. And for this session, we are looking at over-tourism, under-tourism. And both actually, we do not want this to happen. Over-tourism, it may actually set or reduce the value of your tourist products in the long run. Under-tourism, you're not fully maximizing the returns from your tourist products. So I hope with this very distinguished panelists, we can answer some of the questions, how to better manage these two concerns, over-tourism and under-tourism. So what will happen during the panel discussion is I'll be posing questions, and some questions will be common to all panelists, and there's some questions that are specific to each panelist. So we can start with a more general question for everyone to respond. And this is, what could be the major causes of over-tourism? And does over-tourism happen by accident? Or is it a consequence of poor planning? Maybe Fadzir, you can start with that.
I thank you very much for your kind words. I really cannot understand how there could be over-tourism, at least for the next 20 years or so. You know, because as I can see that our problem is now is under-tourism, because this is going to be one of the biggest industry in the world, and it's going up and up and up, you know, and because now more and more people are becoming very conscious of taking that little vacation. You know, at one time we were not very conscious of that, but now we find that our children, our grandchildren will be pestering us all the time. Where do we go for our vacation next weekend, or next school holidays, or next term holidays, things like that. So it's on and on and on. And as you can see now, more and more countries are going to television and this and that, and start branding their countries, rebranding their countries, and spending millions and millions of dollars to promote their countries and so for tourism. So, so maybe many more and more people want to travel now. And if at all, I can see this is question of under-tourism. Let me take, for example, a country like India. India, for example. I remember one of those campaign visits I made during my time to India to promote the Indians to come to Malaysia. And they were quite surprised how active we were in promoting Malaysia. And at that time, we were only doing about 20 over million tourists, 25 million tourists at that time. And India was just having 5 million tourists, foreign tourists. You know, such a huge country, 5 million tourists, and we have 25 million tourists. And I said, you know, you can be easily the biggest tourism country in the world. If you travel from the south to India right to the north, they have everything. They have palaces, monuments, museums, there are mountains, rivers, there's all sorts of things. And in Malaysia and many other countries who are very conscious about this great industry called tourism, we have to spend millions and millions of dollars to build tourism products and so on. But in countries like India, I say that you don't have to spend any. You just have to dust up, just clean up all those existing, you know, huge relics of the past. Some of these great monuments which were built, you know, over the blood and tears and lives of maybe thousands of millions of people and so on over the years. So can you imagine if all those things are cleaned up and properly promoted, my God, how much joy it can bring to the whole world and so on. So if at all I feel that we must have a campaign, you know, to make the whole world conscious about the importance of tourism, how much joy and happiness it can give to the people and so on. You know, and so in that sense, I feel that at this point in time, we don't have to worry much about over-tourism. If at all, we should worry about, we have so much, you know, in our world, in all the countries of the world, to show, and we are underutilizing it. But if we properly clean it up and promote it, it can bring so much joy. So, in short, I feel that let's see how we can really promote everything that we have in this world for people to enjoy. After all, we are now talking about happiness index. You know, we measure happiness, happiness index now. Okay, if you want to talk about happiness, then there's close connection with tourism, with vacation and so on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Tan Sri. So that is a viewpoint that Tan Sri feels that you should be more concerned about under-tourism, because there are still many underutilized tourism assets which have yet to be exploited. So what about Professor Jamieson?
I guess I'm going to take a contrary view. There's no doubt that there are places throughout Asia that really need tourism. Whether these places are ready for it or not is another issue. But there is over-tourism. There are places that are being damaged, either in terms of the environment or the physical attributes. or the impact on people. And that really has to be planned for and dealt with. And so we've seen examples just within our own region that Boracay was closed for a period of time, and Thailand beaches have been closed. There's an increasing awareness that, as we've talked about over the last couple of days, that some places simply have limits, and those limits need to be respected and dealt with. Why does it happen? Well, I think it's fair to say that people that have been arguing for responsible and sustainable tourism have been predicting for some time that our destinations were going to be suffering if we didn't begin to manage the visitor in a more effective way. So certainly planning is important, but equally important is the lack of willingness to manage. And even in cases that I've seen in China and other places where clearly the physical environment has been negatively impacted and continues to be, political interests are not interested or willing to limit the level of visitation because of the potential negative impact on the economy. So part of it is lack of planning, but part of it is, I would argue, a lack of willingness to recognize and manage where over-tourism is occurring. And if I might say one more thing, Mr. Chairman, back to my colleague here, is also the willingness to begin to say that while certain places in a country are heavily visited, over-visited, there are many places, as my colleague was saying here, that are under-visited, and how can we begin to disperse tourism activity? And this is really internationally the big question now, is how can we disperse that tourism activity to places that may be of equal attractiveness in many ways, that could really benefit from the tourism, and could provide the visitor with a better experience.
Yes, there is also the other side of the coin. Yeah, I think in terms of tourism assets, they are just like any other assets. They have to be managed if you want to sustain it, and they have to be maintained. So I think there is concern about under-tourism, but there are also concerns about over-tourism in some tourist products. What about our another panelist, Ms. Mo?
Yes, thank you very much. I think in my professional experience, I've seen both the cases of over-tourism, where the authorities seems to be totally overwhelmed by the numbers of visitors, and on the contrary, those places which are totally deserted and under-visited. So there are two cases. But the question I'd like to pose here, and especially to the tourism industry, is that when you talk about over-tourism or under-tourism, it seems to presuppose that then we should be knowing what is the carrying capacity of the place you're talking about. And do we have that understanding? Once I asked a question to some environmental expert about what is the limit of urban expansion. Because when you see most of the Asian cities, but also those in Gulf countries, it seems that the city keeps expanding. The smaller towns become city, and these small cities start joining together and forming the megalopoles. And that seems to be the trend in many parts of Asia. And the question I had is, like, do we have any parameter to assess what is the limit of an authority to manage this expanding, urban spheres, and what if there are such parameters? What are those? Now, the person to whom I asked that question, he turns out an environmentalist. So he told me, yes, it's clear for environmentalists, the clear parameters of the limit of urban expansion is when a city cannot feed itself through the surrounding food production area. When you are heavily dependent on the food imported from faraway places, that means that actually you have really reached the capacity of the urban expansion, and you should stop not going bigger and bigger and bigger. That's his point of view as an environmentalist. Now, for tourism, I don't know what could be those parameters, but it's interesting to think. For cultural heritage sites, certain things are clear, some monuments are old, and the stability is a question. So there's something called the carrying capacity on the basis of the numbers of people who can climb on the monument at the same time. So that's one parameter. If you're talking about natural heritage site, of course, the human implication on the environmental habitat or the wild animals would be another parameters. But this is a case of a very specific heritage sites or natural heritage sites. Now about city. I don't know what would be the parameters of the to assess whether you have gone beyond what you should be allowing, or you are still within the quota. I have no idea as of yet, but this is something very interesting for all of us to think about.
Right. And Mr. Kruger, what about the Mekong? Is it under-tourism or over-tourism?
Well, if we talk about let me talk about first what I think is more important to focus on. Because to me, under-tourism is something that can be fixed easily, whereas over-tourism, which might damage a destination irreparably, cannot be fixed so easily. For example, Panama is under-tourism, so our friend Matt helps him to fix that. And some destination here have under-tourism. It can be fixed with investment or with whatever, but over-tourism is really a problem. And when we look into how over-tourism occurs, what makes up over-tourism, what makes too many, what is the source of this uneven tourism distribution, let's say that it's either the destination is too good, so everyone wants to come, or the destination is perceived as a place people have to go to. And then over-tourism occurs when the authorities are not able to react quickly enough to compensate for that, either by building capacity or by stopping the tourism. An example, for example, would be, this famous beach in Thailand, which now is closed, which became famous through movies. Actually, movies is a big source of sudden over-tourism. Chiang Mai has most of the tourists are from the movie Lost in Thailand, which made Chiang Mai very popular in China. And actually, little advertisement, we are having a tourism destination film conference. A nice example which I like to use is comparing Thailand with France. If you think about those two countries, because very often people think about Thailand, they think about over-tourism, whereas in France, they think less so much, of course in Paris a little bit. But many people are not aware that Thailand and France are exactly the same size with the same population numbers. Yes. However, Thailand has about 35 million tourists a year, and France has 85 million. Now, what France does, the tourism distribution is much better. Tourism is much better distributed in France because each department is in charge of their own tourism. They build their own attraction, and France had much more time to build their infrastructure and their tourism strategies. I believe the risk we have in Asia, and that partially has to do with what I'm doing, has to do with social media, is that destinations are overwhelmed by the speed. Governments are overwhelmed by the speed for which things can happen. And then they are not prepared. There was no risk management. There was no strategic plan, no optional plan. What can happen if A happens? What do we do if we have under-tourism and so on? So this is an area where they have there much more research has to be done, and the governments have to concentrate much more on.
Can I just add to that, because I think it's a really important point. But if we think about comparisons, if we look at the way that our cities have grown over very short periods of time, the rate of growth has been incredible, something not seen anywhere. So where in Europe, the cities have grown, but nothing like here in Asia. And so they're in a better position. But what we're asking is that as our urban populations grow so significantly, and these people require water and housing and transportation, that our municipal authorities are struggling, on one hand, to simply provide the most basic of services, often with inadequate financial and governance, financial resources and governance. And then on top of that, we're looking at this incredible growth of tourism and the strains that that again puts on transportation and on water and a whole series of other things. So it's a very unique, and so I agree with Gerrit, that we really need to spend more time not looking, and it's fine to look at Europe, but we really have to think about that we're in this very unique situation here, that we're struggling with not only over-tourism, but I agree with my friend Mo that we're also suffering from this incredible growth that we have to deal with, and we don't have the resources to deal with our residents and making sure that they can get the right kind of services, and how do we stop that growth? And then we've got the incredible tourism that we're experiencing. So we're in a very unique place, and I think I completely agree with Gerrit that we need to better understand the dynamic between city growth and provision of services and tourism.
Okay, the message I get from there is that we always need proper planning. Whether it is over-tourism or under-tourism, planning is key. So I would like to pose a question to Dato again. What does he think? Is tourism in Malaysia or in Asia, do we really plan properly in terms of managing our tourism assets?
We just can compare tourism in Europe, for example, tourism in Asia. Now, they are developed for a long time, they've been developing for a long time. And tourism in Europe, France, for example, they have really developed over a long, long time. And then all their tourism assets are distributed all over France, not concentrated only at certain areas and so on. So, even though they have 85 million tourists there, I'm sure it's more than that, but they do not feel, the pressure of over-tourism and so on, because the tourism assets well spread out and so on. But we don't have that kind of situation in Asia. Tourism is something relatively very new in Asia, and we are now just developing. In Malaysia, for example, now thanks to M, we started developing Langkawi. So now we have Langkawi, everybody is going there, and sometimes we feel, the problems of over-tourism. All right? But then, if we have developed more areas, there are a lot of more, beautiful areas in Malaysia itself. And if we can really develop more areas in Terengganu, in Johor, Melaka is already developed, and if we spread out, these tourism assets, attracting tourism assets all over the country, then we wouldn't feel that about problems of over-tourism and stuff like that. So I think the same problem the whole of Asia, India, China, and so on, they're now beginning to really, build their tourism assets, and not only in certain places, but all over the region, all over the Asia. Now, if they do that fast, then I certainly feel, it'll be quite some time before we really feel the pressure or the problems that's connected with over-tourism.
All right. So, in other words, we need more planning. And okay, now I'm asking each and every panelist a very specific question. We can start with Mr. Kruger about this Mekong, the Mekong experience, and the way that you have demonstrated to us how social marketing can be a very effective tool. How do you see this happening in other tourism products in other parts of the world?
Well, social marketing or social commerce, how we call it, can have any destination. Of course, there is a risk if you have too much of it and you don't build up your capacity, that you will get a lot of tourists out of that, which is a good risk to have. What we are seeing a bit, there is this kind of thing is called Instagrammable moments, which is a certain view everyone wants to photograph. Yeah, and UNESCO is at fault, totally at fault for having that in lots of destinations. If a destination solely depends on one of these spots, like Siem Reap, for example, almost solely depends on Angkor Wat, the sunrise in Angkor Wat. There's a number of others in the region. A lot of these UNESCO sites are these spots, so especially if when they're very small. Luang Prabang as well has this kind of problem. Then social media has to be integrated in the total planning, in the total strategy. If you only rely on it, you attract the wrong tourists, but you want this kind of tourists to get the right message out to the public because everyone is using it, yeah, especially the young people. So I think any destination can use it, but it has to be planned very carefully. I think this is the magic word in this matter.
So it's still planning. Okay, Prof. Jamieson, I always would like to ask this question because during the conference, a lot of papers touching on technology and how technology can disrupt or even help the tourism industry. I would like to Professor Jamieson to address this question of how we can actually beneficially use technology to actually manage all these concerns over over-tourism or under-tourism. Yes, Prof.
Okay. You're asking an interesting person about technology, but can I just, I'll come back to that, Mr. Chairman. But if we think about planning, if we look at the poster child of over-tourism, Barcelona, here's a place that's got an incredible planning apparatus, incredible regulatory controls, and yet it has been overrun by tourism to the point, and I think it was Gerrit yesterday who showed this slide of people in Barcelona saying, go home. Maybe it wasn't somebody, but somebody had a slide that said, go home. So we really have a situation where the carrying capacity, in this case, was the residents' carrying capacity for the disruption to their lives. Right? So that's an important factor. How do you plan for that? Well, you have to understand then that there is a capacity on the part of local people to have their lives disrupted. And it's not just the numbers, it's the fact that we have Airbnbs that are quickly changing the structure of neighborhoods. And so while we like the sharing economy in places like Berlin and Amsterdam and Barcelona are really having a serious impact. So Barcelona elected a socialist mayor. She ran on a platform of stopping or slowing down the tourism development and put a moratorium for 1 year on any new hotel construction in the central part of Barcelona. So I think we have to be somewhat cautious that we can plan, but if there isn't a political will. So, but I answer your question. One of the important parts of this then is that we have to become much more sophisticated about how we manage our tourists. And so there's a field in the natural environment area called visitor management with well-known models and approaches to how you manage visitors at sites to minimize, obviously, the impact on the ecological balance and systems that are there. And those of us that work in destination management are now starting to talk about the kind of models that we could be using, that we can, in some cases, absorb more tourists if we're prepared to manage them. And I'll give you just two quick examples, Mr. Chairman. When I was doing a tourism plan in Cambodia, one of the things that was happening, this is many years ago, the museum was jammed every morning. It was way over its carrying capacity. And the rest of the day, there was no one at the museum because every tour group decided that they would start their tour at the museum. So a very simple management technique was to say, let's get together as tour operators and schedule our visits at various times to minimize the overuse and to provide a better experience. So that's visitor management, a very simple example that we can begin to understand. On a more complex basis, can we begin to think about the fact that most of our destinations have peak seasons? They're really overrun for sometimes quite limited periods of time. In our case, in Thailand, for example, the high season is what? It's partway through November, end of February, somewhere in there, related largely to weather. But are there ways that we can expand the shoulder seasons on either end by incentives, by special group fairs, by putting on special events, that we can begin to say to people, if you really want to come, there are times when it's expensive, that it's not very convenient. But if we can use social media as an example to begin to build those shoulder seasons, we can still have the kind of the activity that we need in order to generate the jobs and the income without doing it. And social media is a great way of doing that, because we can say, by the way, it's really great to come at this time of the year. Very different experiences. And so I'll just give you a quick example. For those people coming from Europe or North America, rain is not something they would particularly welcome as part of their experience. But we were working with a tour operator who was bringing people in from the Middle East, and those people were coming in the rainy season. And we're saying, why are you coming in the rainy season? No one wants to come. They said, well, think about where we come from. It's terribly dry. We never see rain, so the opportunity of being in a lush environment, which is humid and wonderful, is great. So that's taking, an alternative approach. And how do we get out to that traveler to say, oh, by the way, this is a great time to come. Not as many people, but on top of it, you got this incredibly different experience than you would have at home. So again, social media and visitor management work together.
So again, I think this points to planning.
Yes.
And in planning, the technology you can use is big data analytics to analyze big data, so that we can manage these different ups and downs of the customers. Before I go to you, Ms. No, there is a question from the floor. Maybe we can take one. This question is that in relation to the carrying capacity, who actually determines carrying capacity, and how do we define how much is over and how much is under? It is often a mismatch between policymakers and the private sector. What are your views?
Right. Actually, that was a question to the audience for you to think about, so it's not me to give the answer. But what I typically see as a practice when we talk about tourism carrying capacity, people understand that simply in terms of the numbers of available hotel rooms and how many people they can accommodate in a particular city. That is a very typical tourism feasibility study I found across the world. And so often the solution therefore proposed is, okay, let's make more hotels. And which does not seem to be like a very sustainable solution necessarily. So this is like one, for me, a bad practice of only looking at carrying capacity, question of carrying capacity from one single hotelier's point of view. Now, what else are the other carrying capacity? What are the other parameters? Actually, this would be the homework to all the hotel industry people to think about. But in doing so, please talk with the heritage professionals and the environmental professionals and also those in charge of the safety. For instance, a room here, normally there's also a maximum carrying capacity on the basis, and that is very much determined by the fire brigade's standard. There is another size of the room, and it's not supposed to exceed a certain number of people if you want to ensure a smooth evacuations. There are different parameters like this, and all these things have to be taken into account. I think that goes down to the presentation this afternoon by Eric. It's about managing different sources of data to do a proper analysis. Now, can I make a comment about the person's point of view about over-tourism? Yes, over-tourism is an issue for most of the heritage site managers. When you look at the report by the World Heritage Site Managers that they submit to UNESCO every 6 years, 75% of them say that the visitors management is the biggest management issue of the site. And that is not only from Asia but across the world. So that, I think, remains one area that everybody is struggling. Now, I said that over-tourism affects the stability and the consolidation of the site. But beyond that, what we usually find frustrating is that this massive flow of tourism visiting the site does not necessarily enhance the budget or the income to support the heritage conservation in most of the countries. Let me give an example. India, there's national monuments under the Archaeological Survey of India, often called ticketed monuments because people have to pay the entrance fee. So the entrance fee are collected, but now this money, where does it go? It just goes to the general kitty of the government. It's not meant to come back to the very heritage sites that have collected that money. That's a problem. Bhutan, where everybody loves to go to see its natural heritage and cultural heritage. As you know, if you want to go there, you have to do the previous booking from the how can I say, government authorized tourism agencies, and you pay everything to them. And its fund is managed by Tourism Council. 40% goes the general government kitty. 60% is retained by the Tourism Council. And this money would not go to the Heritage Department who are doing the maintenance of the site. And it's been a very long battle between the two departments to see how can we actually divert some of those tourism income to support the heritage conservation need, or we call it need of natural heritage conservation, because somehow the government system is not meant to to channel that income that was created thanks to the existence of the heritage. So for the heritage, let's say, professional's point of view, no matter, having a lot of visitors really is more a problem because it really has never been of a benefit in terms of the financial resource of the heritage sector. So this is again goes to planning.
Yes.
Yes. Chiba. I think the points just now mentioned were very, very, very good. One thing I want to raise is if we talk about planning, we always have to talk about the indicators. Because I strongly believe that the indicators we're using, like tourism arrivals, GDP, tourism revenue, are wrong indicators. They're used because they're easy. It's easy to measure the arrivals. It's relatively easy to measure tourism spend. But these indicators lead to people in charge looking at wrong strategies, because very often the goal is to increase tourism numbers year on year on year on year to look good, simply to look good in the public eye. But it's not necessarily the best result for the people who live there, for the locals. Sometimes it's a better result to increase to make it more scarce. For example, I know you had on the question Sheikh Maya Bay. Thailand did absolutely the right thing by closing the beach. If something is broken, you have to fix it. You don't keep it open and get it totally destroyed. But these kind of things obviously are very easy for closed experiences, like this beach, closed experience like Angkor Wat, where you could just limit the number of tickets which they're doing, or you could increase the pricing. To me, the question would be more, how do we manage tourism, over-tourism flows in open destinations, like cities or whole regions. Because those are much more complex processes, much more long-term processes that have to be planned with the right indicators, which is at the moment very difficult to do. We see that in Thailand, where everyone goes to Bangkok, Pattaya, Chiang Mai, obviously. In Thailand just launched this year a very good campaign where they are promoting the more remote areas in Thailand, and this is, I think, is a good effort, but we have to see what is the effect. Will they win from it, or will it have no impact at all?
Can I just,
Yes.
just a comment. We've heard experience throughout the last 2 days, and I'm just going back to Gerrit's point. One of the measures then that I would argue, and I talked about yesterday, is really what kind of an experience is the visitor having? What kind of an experience do we want to provide? And so back to Mel's point, that certainly the people in heritage sites in North America have now started to say that what we want to measure our success by is not how many people are going through or how much money people spent on our gift shop, but that people leave the site knowing more about the topic than when they arrived. Right? That's an interesting factor. Because the reason that we have these sites is not to run people through them, but because we feel that, whether it's a natural or a cultural site, that the kind of values, the kind of lessons that we can get from these places are important for our residents and our visitors, the story we're telling. Right? And so that then says that maybe we can only put through 25 people an hour, because that's all we can do in terms of the experience. Now, if you give us more money, and you're absolutely bang on, we don't give them the money that is commensurate with the visitation, but saying if you give us more money, we can have more guides, we can then manage them in a more effective way. We know by experience that one person can supervise typically 25 people at most. So there's a lot of information that we already have about that. But I agree with Gerrit, that has to do with closed sites. They're much easier. But if we start to say, and advertise, by the way, if you're coming to visit, attraction A, if you don't have a reservation, don't bother coming because you're not getting in. And we see increasingly now the whole idea of reservations, lotteries, advanced reservations, a whole series of management techniques that say if you're coming to the Taj Mahal and you don't have a reservation, you're not going to get in. And by the way, I guess the new regulation is you only can spend 3 hours there. So there are ways that we can actually make the visitor aware that there are capacities in our destination in particular parts of it. And don't bother coming if you don't already have a reservation. If your sole purpose is to come to the Taj Mahal or to a particular historic site. So I think we need to share more information because there's a lot of management stuff out there that we need to be more aware of, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of saying if we're going to provide the kind of experiences to the visitor and for the residents and without damage to the ecosystems that we're dealing with, it costs money to manage that. And so we need to be able to convince decision makers that some of that money that's coming in needs to be devoted to the management of the site itself.
Yeah, I think the message that has been given here is that if you want to have returning visitors, then experience is important. What kind of experience that tourists have tasted during the visit. Now, yesterday we talked also about the management of these tourist sites, heritage, museum, and there are some views that maybe it's better left to private management, private sector management, rather than government. So that's it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, you are right there, but then you see when you privatize some of these tourism products, tourism assets, tourism attractions and so on, they have a tendency to over-commercialize it. Then it's profit motive. How to get the most return from that thing. So there is a danger there. But on the other hand, we know that when private sector takes over managing certain areas and so on, they do it so efficiently compared to the public sector, government doing it. All right. So that's the reason. But on the other hand, now this planning of tourism, especially in Asian countries, is actually a very recent policy. Very recent, you know. I mean, compared to the West, they have been doing it for a very long time. I can see that many countries in Asia have been started thinking of tourism only the last 5 years, something like that. You know? Even in Malaysia, we started seriously looking at tourism only about 15 years ago. You know? Before that, we were more proud that we are very good in growing trees, rubber trees, palm oil trees, cocoa trees. And we were, then slowly we went into manufacturing, we were doing well in all those things, and we didn't care much about tourism. But now, thank God, you know, every Asian countries in Asia, they are beginning to accept that this, tourism industry is something every country should give priority, where relatively speaking, your investment is so little compared to the benefits. So now everybody is rushing into that. But again, so it's good that right from the beginning, you know, that we must emphasize the importance of really having a strong planning team, you know, to build this industry.
Okay, very good. I think we can now open to some questions from the floor. We have some questions here, but I look at the questions, they have all been answered by the panelists. So anybody who would like to stand up and... Yes, please.
Dato. Mr. Chairman, dear panelists and friends, it's my pleasure and honor to be joining you in this tourist conference. I do have some points to share on this session. I do not know whether I understand the concept of over-tourism and under-tourism correctly, but in my view, there are both the positive sides and the negative sides of tourism. For example, we think about tourism for developing our economy. And we are also thinking of tourism for human happiness for our countries. In Thailand, we used to promote tourism once, and we are sick of it. I'm sorry to say this, but I do admire Kadir of Malaysia, truly Asia. I look at the CNN every night. I saw that first, so I'm so glad that I met you today. But in Thailand, if you know Pattaya, Pattaya is a city where all the foreigners come and enjoy with all the entertainments, but no casino. If you want to play casinos, they come to Cambodia, they go to Myanmar, they go to Laos. But I think for tourism, we do not want that kind of tourism. If you it's a short word, we call it sex tourism or sex tour. That's the result of promoting with no limits sometimes. So now Thai ladies do not want to visit Pattaya anymore, because any lady who visited Pattaya would be branded as a prostitute. It is same as some Thai ladies who travel to Japan, Tokyo, Osaka, which are now open. And when they arrive in Osaka, when they arrive in Tokyo, the Thai ladies are looked at as some kind of prostitute whores. This is the negative side of the tourism that we also be put into our plans. So tourism is not for just developing economy, But we should not exploit of the culture. Exploitation of the culture meaning really human beings, cultures, religions. Thai people, they are Buddhist country. They are very sick when they see some foreigners go into the temple and play with this Buddha statue, kick it, or touch the head, or do something bad as a behavior that they do not know what beliefs are the Buddhist religion belief is. And these are the negative sides. So I am questioning whether we call it over and under tourism. Whether over means too much, too many tourists. Under means not enough tourist visitors or not. But I would rather be, I don't know, I may join Professor Jamieson's idea about the other concept of tourism. But this is also good for planning. We should be planning for the good culture of that local people. But if tourism would hurt the people, if tourism would hurt the culture, we should protect it. Whether by technology, whether by education, or by some kind of cooperation, or by legalization of the local or international standard in tourism. I might put a very hard issue in this subject. But I think we should take it as a serious problem. I mentioned Pattaya, Thailand, as the site that many foreigners like it. But now, Thailand people do not like it anymore. Is this over-tourism, or is it? Second point, I take the concept of entertainment and casino together. Where is the point of, at the middle, or the peaceful point of this casino and entertainment? In the US, Nevada, where we visited, or in the Genting Island, in Malaysia, a lot of money is made from the entertaining or the casino. This is the reason why Thailand cannot. I am for the casino because we cannot stop the habits of some people. But how do we stop, how do we set the standard for that kind of entertaining or casino place? Whether it should not, if it's not for hurting people, some people with a full pocket money would come back as a bimbo to somebody who has no money in their pocket. That kind of, the thing is, what Thailand is afraid of promoting for tourists to come. But some countries, they open casinos, they open entertainment complex, whatever they call it. These are some of the things that I would like this panel to consider in planning. I know that Gerrit Kruger has been talking about all the good sides of it, and I support in promoting that kind of cultural tourism. But I also think of the negative side. We should be protecting disruption of tourism, or whatever the term I should use, but I hope you understand what I mean. But these are some of the points that I come and join, and this come to my mind. I didn't plan to talk on these points, but I think this is the session that I should like to put into the thoughts of all of us. For the disruption of tourism is also possible, but how can we plan to protect it instead of just the development of tourism for good?
Thank you very much.
Can I just?
So is this something to do with the branding strategy?
Well, can I just comment, because they're really excellent points. when I moved to Thailand 20 years ago on a Canadian project, the Canadian government spent time educating us about Thai culture and about the role of the royal family and the high esteem of the royal family, a whole series of factors. But we don't do that very much. So we find that tourists may be offensive at times in terms of their behavior because they don't understand the culture, the values that are there. Now, the minute that you begin to understand the nature of the culture, the system, what people treasure, don't treasure, the fact that you don't touch somebody on the head, that feet are, there's a whole series of aspects that local people take for granted, but the tourist doesn't know until we can make the tourist aware. And so we don't like in the tourism industry to do that, and yet I think it's our responsibility to say, when you come to our country, here are the rules is a very strong word, but here are the things that we value as a society, and we expect you, when you come to our place, to value those things and not be offensive. Now, when people go to temples, at times they don't realize that this is like a church, and the kind of behavior that they are participating in are completely different than if they were in a church, because they don't understand the religious significance, the role it plays in the society, how important it is for the growth of the society. So I think when we go back to what can we do, it's really behavior that we can manage. So it's not, as you were saying, over under, it's the offensiveness or whatever of certain behaviors that really affect what the impacts of tourism. So I just wanted to say, I thought those points were important ones, that it's not just numbers. It's the way that the people, the tourist, the visitor acts when he or she is in a place. And we should be prepared to provide direction and regulation about that so that it's not a negative impact on our societies.
Yeah, yes.
Me, sorry, I have 3 points on that, sorry. I think you're right. Maybe there's another definition we need for over-tourism. It's not only too many tourists. Over-tourism could also mean just too many of the wrong tourists, which could be those who don't understand. Even if you have a few tourists and all of them don't understand the culture, obviously it's over-tourism. Maybe that's a different definition. Another point is, when I said earlier, reasons for over-tourism, I forgot one, which I have to add. One reason for over-tourism is also greed. Greed and selfishness. Selfishness, yes. Greed and selfishness, which could come from several sides. And this also has to do with how destinations are managed and who's managing them. It could be in the private sector as much as in the government sector, actually. This kind, it could be greed for money, but it also could be greed for respect or whatsoever. If one person is there very often, or a group of people very often who want more money, who want to have more respect or whatsoever, and just walk over everyone else, that's where we see that things are breaking down. So in the planning process, planning again, I think, as well as when we see, to me it doesn't make a difference if an attraction is managed by the government or by a private sector. What is important that both sides have to be involved. There always has to be a partnership between the private sector and the public sector. The public sector has to set some kind of a framework, because there's a lot of attractions which have to be accessible to the public. Whether it's only for free for the local public, that they can take part in their own heritage, or whether there is a framework what is not allowed for the private sector. The private sector's role is to make money, that's why they're there. Yeah? But it should not be at the cost of everyone else. Yeah? It cannot be limitless walk about everyone. We had this race yesterday, buying in all products from China and selling them to the tourists, so all the money basically flows out. It's also who manages the attraction. If the government gives out the attraction contract to a foreign entity, for example, and the local populace has no benefit from it other than getting cheap labor jobs in there, that's not right. Then the local people were not involved in the planning process. I think it's important to do anything in this public-private framework as a partnership, even if it takes longer to do.
Just a little point. Now, maybe one area where we can lessen the offensive results of tourism is this area which now becoming more and more attractive, is ecotourism. Ecotourism. And when you talk about ecotourism, then you are also actually trying to disperse attractions all over the place, over a wider area and so on. And fortunately now we can see that everywhere more and more people are interested into that kind of tourism. They're going into the jungle, to the mountains, to the rivers and so on, away from the town, where we always tend to have this problem of over-tourism and then the offensive behavior and whatnot. So this is one area, as I said, you know, everywhere I can see that people seem now to be enjoying going to these rural areas, not only to see the mountains, the rivers and whatnot, but also to see the peaceful, the way of life of the rural people, the simple way of life of the rural people and so on. Overall, become something very, very attractive. So ecotourism is one area. I think it will be very helpful for us to lessen the offensive part of this tourism business.
Yes, ecotourism is another rising product. Yes, anybody else from the audience? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's one behind there as well.
So back to back, Prof.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Farhani. I'm from Senegal Museums. So basically, I just want to ask about this kind of situation that happened. Actually, if you can see in Malaysia, okay, with the use of social media, now people are promoting to go to some places, for example, like 10 things to do in Malacca, something like that. And then people are going there. Many people are going there. But how can we? But not so many. I mean, not all the people that are going there is really exploring all the Malacca area. You know. So my question is, how we want to get a quality tourists? Because some of the tourists, they go to Malacca, they don't enter the museum. They take photo outside the museum, check. Okay,
Yes.
bucket list, tick.
Yes.
Okay. If you go to, let's say for example, because if you realize there's one trend in social media right now, go to 6 countries in 8 days, something like that, or go to Kota Kinabalu using only 500 ringgit budget. So go to Korea, South Korea in less than 1,000 ringgit. Okay, so sometimes the tourists that go to one country or visit any places, they didn't spend much money. So if they didn't spend much, how they want to help with our economy? Because we want to get tourists who want to spend at our place. So how we want to tackle that situation?
Yeah. Can we take another question? It's another question.
Yes, I see has been raised.
No? No question.
Another question?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Oh, here. Okay.
It's actually not a question. I'm Nick, by the way, from the Philippines. It's just my insight that the government is responsible for it, as well as the private sector. But we also have to teach the tourists to be responsible enough to respect the culture, the environment, so that we will be able to avoid what happened in our case to Boracay. So that's it.
Professor Walter Jamieson, I presume we have to leave.
He didn't like the question.
Can we give a big round for Professor Walter Jamieson? Thank you for being part of the today event, Professor. Indeed, it's been a pleasure. Over to you, sir.
Okay, Dato, you want to respond?
Yeah, I want to respond to the lady's question about people going to some of these interesting places and taking pictures outside, and that's enough. Right? We have this terrible thing, which is catching up, becoming very much, a real danger now. There's what they call zero cost tours. zero cost to us. You know, it's unbelievable. You know, and you know, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, you know, are taking this zero cost to us, which means that they hardly pay anything at all. Going from China, coming to Malaysia, from Malaysia going to China, or this and you have companies having hundreds of buses, you know, I mean, using, to service this zero cost to us. So they come to Malaysia, for example, and they hardly go anywhere. From the airport, then maybe they go to our palace, and all will take picture up from at the gate there. Alright, that's it. Or the buses will take them and leave them near the Selangor Club, Padang, and they will loiter around there, take pictures, and that's that. Or they will take them to Putrajaya, for example, leave them near the mosque. They will loiter around there. So it doesn't cost anything for the tour company. But more important, then after that, they will take them from one place to another to do shopping. And there they are forced, they know how to attract these people to buy things which cost say 100 ringgit, and they sell it for 300 ringgit. Things which cost 50 ringgit, 150 ringgit. And this is happening terribly, you know, in Asia, especially in Asia. All right. I remember in the 10 years ago, I saw this very serious problem, and I spoke to China. I went to China and organized a conference, and China hosted. I said, why do you allow your citizens to be cheated, to be ripped off like that? We want them to come our country and see the beauty of our country, our culture, our sights and sound and so on. Alright, so they hosted a conference in Kunming, and I got my colleagues from all the ASEAN countries, the ministers of tourism of ASEAN to come. Anyway, in short, we had a resolution to ban these zero cost tours. So every country must make sure that their tour agents and so on don't involve themselves in these zero cost tours. If they do that, we will cancel their licenses and so on. So for a while, it was okay. But lately, for the last few years, I would say 3 or 4 years, it has grown about a few fold worse. Now you can see so many buses going around, and it's all for zero cost tours. So don't talk about museums and this and that. It is a game of ripping off a poor, innocent tourists. So this is a very serious matter. I hope we can all do something about that.
Thank you. This sounds like the get rich quick scheme. It will die down for a while, then it comes again. And you all will have people who subscribe to this. Yes, you wanted to.
I always have things to say, sorry. First of all, that's a good point actually. $0 tourism should be illegal, and some countries did this already. But to your question, if you have an attraction, if you do anything in tourism, you have to have the right mix of visitors. We saw that earlier in the Panama presentation, where they basically created these personas, these 4 personas of tourists that come for different purposes, that do totally different things. In case of a museum of attractions, this can be done by the design of the museum. Yes, you will have people who only come, take a photo, leave. Those who can basically take, okay, they give me free publicity, but that's about it. I could just have a front, lock my door, and they still come. But these are not necessarily the people you want. If you only have those people, you do something wrong. Yeah, that means your museum is not attractive enough for people to walk in. Normally I would assume you have a certain mix of visitors. So you have families by having your exhibit in a way that makes it attractive for children. You have maybe more in-depth information or something interactive to make it attractive for young people. Maybe you have a library, or you have deeper information to make it interesting for people who are more interested in history. And by that you create this kind of mix which you have to monitor. You have to monitor. This has to be a healthy mix. If one of these components, let's say for example, older European people are 50% of your visitors, then you have a certain risk that if something, let's say happens in your destination, there's some natural disaster, something political, these are really risk-averse people, that they stay away. So for that you need an emergency, you need a risk assessment, you need an emergency solution. And I think it's not very difficult for you to get together as a team and really check who are we getting right now, who do we want to get, and work together with a destination of getting these people in there. Then you can use social media, because except for the maybe elder generation, but if you have an interesting exhibit and you attract younger people and you make it Instagrammable again, they will take the pictures and they will talk about it to their tribe and bring in more people automatically.
Yes, actually I have a question to you. Because to what extent, I just came back from Malacca and met with the people from Fadzir, the Association of the Museums in Malacca. And my question is, to what extent your museums actually collaborate and plan together with the tourism department? Because it might sound obvious, but in many parts I realized that most obvious connection is not established. And so I just wonder what is the situation in Malacca? Or your case, you're from the Museum Selangor.
We have in terms of collaboration, we do collaborate between the museums. We have an association of museums in Malaysia, and then in terms of local, travel agent, I also collaborate. I'm doing a package for people, tourists who are using cruise, the cruise visitor. They stop at the Port Klang, and then we bring out to our museums. We do some cultural performance, and then museum tour. But I do admit that we didn't really, fully collaborate. We only attached to one or two travel agent only. So we need to really do the collaboration to widen our collaboration more.
Yeah, because for instance, it's useful for the museums to understand what is the profile of the visitors, right? Because you have all sort of visitors, those who might be interested in knowing more about the history of Malacca, and those who wants to ride on this Hello Kitty tree show, or those who want to hang around just for the cafes. You have different kinds of audience. Tourist is not just a same homogeneous group of people. So unless you understand the profile, you would not know how to then improve your contents, right? So this is like another area you have to think about. It's obvious thing, and then we have to understand then how different profile of people would behave or go around in which part of the town, what is their kind of tendency. That again can ultimately, reflect on the content of the museums. And then you can decide which one perhaps you want to target to capture and to design your activity.
So just add one more point about the 10 top things to do somewhere. Yeah. Okay, there are two things you can do. These top 10 lists are publicity tools, so someone writes them. So if you're not on the list, that means either they don't know about you or you're not one of the top 10 attractions. That's number one. Number two is you can also write those lists and publicize them, yeah? Just as a tip. Get a writer, get a publisher, get an influencer, write the lists, and of course, if they write the lists for you, you might have to pay them a little though. You are in that list, yeah.
Sorry, another point. Do you also have a plan as a museum, a strategies or vision on how you want to contribute to the education of the local people living in Malacca? Because often people think the museum is for tourists, but it's not only for tourists. Museum is for the education also of your own people, and so you also have to think about activities that are catered to continuously providing, stimulating education activities to local people. When this happens, the quality of your content also increases, and that will be also another kind of way to start attracting other people, outside visitors. What I found interesting is an example of vegan in Philippines. It's as World Heritage Sites. Actually, this is a place which organizes a lot of festivals. I mean, maybe you have city-level festivals almost literally every month. But most of them are actually not for the not designed for the outside tourists. It's for the local people's entertainment. So people really enjoy coming and be part of this. And it's all meant for the local people to feel proud of the city and learn more about the heritage of the city. And because of that, the event is sustainable. And then the outside visitors start kind of getting attracted because it's not designed only for the tourists. And often perhaps we lack imagination. Something we only design for tourists turns out to be very cheap and not very glamorous. So it's something we have to also think about as an alternative way of looking at the functions, or the raison d'être of the museums.
Okay, I think we have come almost to the end of the session. I'm sure there are many questions to raise, many more things to discuss. Maybe I suggest we reserve that for the next forum. So as for today's forum, I'm sure we agree we had very valuable discussion on how to address this over-tourism and under-tourism. But the key thing, as mentioned throughout the discussion, is planning. Is planning to sustain this tourism assets. Because if you just get your return over a short time, then you're not sustaining it. And the key to sustaining is to manage it so that the assets continue to be of value. So that's how I see it. And I'm sure we have a good discussion. And Fadzir, thank you again for coming. And Ms. Mo and Mr. Kruger. And I hope we can show our appreciation in the usual manner.